Coming up, the debut novel Shudder is being called a blood-chilling supernatural thriller. We'll talk to the author. And we learn about Diné resistance at the Intermountain Indian Boarding School. Plus, it's a big week for two Native women making history in Washington, D.C. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. There's a new leader in Washington, D.C., and another first with a new title. On Monday, Mohegan Chief Lynn Malerba was sworn into office as the 45th Treasurer of the United States. Dressed in her traditional regalia, she took her oath of office. Malerba's signature was collected as part of the ceremony. Her name will now appear on all U.S. currency that is printed. She was overcome with emotion as she explained the significance of this duty.
My parents raised 7 children with so much love, but a lot of financial hardship. And they struggled so greatly to provide for us, but they did an amazing job. And imagine now their name is on the currency when they found it so difficult to have any in their lifetime.
Several Indigenous leaders were in attendance at the signing ceremony, including Secretary Deb Haaland and Congresswoman Sharice Davids. Malerba is now the first Indigenous woman to have her signature on money in the country's history. Well, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is fresh off of a visit to Nevada to discuss a big topic. Haaland met with tribal and local leaders to discuss conservation. She traveled to the southern part of the state to tour Avikwame. The area is sacred to several tribes, including the Fort Mojave Indian tribe. Tribal council members told Haaland that the area is also referred to as Spirit Mountain, and it is the place of origin for 10 human-speaking tribes. The land is currently on the National Registry of Historic Properties as a designated traditional cultural property. Stakeholders told Haaland about their vision to protect it for future generations. Part of Avikwame has some of the largest Joshua trees in Nevada. Now to where community safety and treaty rights were some of the topics at a recent political forum for citizens of the Lac La Ronge Indian Band. Located in north-central Saskatchewan, this is the first time the nation has allowed an in-person cultural gathering since the pandemic began. APTN's Leanne Sanders has the story.
It was the first time since before the pandemic that a cultural gathering could be held in La Ronge. Indigenous artisans and craftspeople with goods for sale, and demonstrations of traditional methods of bow and paddle making, hide prep, and birch bark biting and beating were showcased at the Urban Reserve across from the lake. Chief Tammy Cook-Searson says during political meetings, talks centered on the challenges of making the community safer.
The gangs, community safety, the violence in the community, trapping issues, the need to support the trappers, being out on the land with their families, the language, the housing issues. So that continues to be a huge issue within our communities.
The Saskatchewan government's trespass legislation, enacted at the beginning of the year, is at odds with the treaty right to hunt and fish. And Cook-Searson says when it comes to traditional territories, First Nations need to continue asserting their rights.
I think that's important for us to assert our rights too, and to say this is what we want instead of people telling us what they think we should do, like provincial governments, federal governments. We as First Nations need to continue to set set rules and regulations of our own.
But Cook Searson says it's also important to focus on the positive things happening.
We need to build on those successes, even the youth hunting camps that we have, the land-based learning, all the different successes that are happening in our communities, the graduation rates, the post-secondary rates that are going up, and people getting out there, earning degrees, trades, going into the Army, the RCMP forces.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Now to California, where a restaurant with a new location is honoring Indigenous food and family. Cafe Aloni reopened September 1st at the Hearst Museum of Anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Co-owner Vincent Medina says making the move was a tough decision. That's because research from a former director of the museum caused the Aloni to lose its federal recognition. Medina says part of his mission is to combat that by building better relationships with the university and museum. He added that he looks forward to sharing Aloni cuisine with customers. Much like traditional cooking, Cafe Aloni's menu is based on the season's availability. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Returning Home is a new book about the Intermountain Indian School in Utah. It was the largest federal boarding school that operated between 1950 and 1984. Joining us today is Farina King. She is an associate professor at the University of Oklahoma and is one of the 3 co-authors of the book. Hi, Farina. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, good morning.
So let's just start off from the beginning. Tell us how this book was first started and how the conversation started.
This book started being a collaboration between myself and doctors Michael Taylor and James Swenson. Actually, Michael Taylor has been a friend of mine for many years, and he knew that I had worked with Navajo Diné boarding school experiences, since I'm a descendant of boarding school survivors. And he knew that Navajos were mainly sent to Intermountain at first for the first 20 years. So then he reached out to me and told me about all these collections of poetry, art. And I knew about these stories too, mainly from relatives and friends who kept sharing them with me. So it was an effort to connect with the community, the actual alumni, and these collections that have been scattered or gathered in university archives, like at Utah State University.
And how do you go about compiling all of those really sensitive documents into something like a book?
Yeah, I think boarding school is, very sensitive for me. It's really feeling that intergenerational trauma that my own father almost died by trying to run away in a snowstorm from a boarding school in New Mexico. And hearing all these stories from my aunties, uncles, cousins even, it is hard. But what was inspiring about this was actually a good friend of ours named Jesse Holiday from Sabi in Disguise, which is Monument Valley. It's famous for the iconic images in movies, and I identified as the West, but it's Diné homeland, and it was where Jesse was from. So I started to see that Jesse had artwork. He'd do watercolors of home, and I talked to him, and he told me he also went to boarding school. And I thought, whoa, where's this disconnect of, he told me that he actually learned how to do paint and watercolor in boarding school. So that was very impressive to me, because I thought, about all these dark aspects and sensitive aspects of boarding schools. But he then told me art pulled me out. That's how he got through a lot of those hard times, was envisioning home and expressing that through his art. And we found that with poetry too. So putting that together in a book was also what Intermountain alumni asked us to do. And we felt like we had to do that for them, for their children too, and posterity, that they know they're artists, they are poets, even though they went through so much hardship.
Let's actually talk more about that. Is there a specific poem that stands out to you, when you were doing this research and ultimately what ends up in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some poems that range on, and there's actually stories. A poet that resonated with all of us working on this book, because it not only involved the co-authors, Michael and James. We also worked with the Navajo Diné translator, Rena Dunn, and others, Terrence Ride, students, different people. And one person, and the story being really incredible, was Henry Tinhorn. He actually died very young after graduating from Intermountain. He went to Vietnam and passed away there. I didn't realize this, but I knew and had interviewed, done an oral history with his sister before I even knew that connection. And Michael happened to be a neighbor to her. And so we'd read his work, like Mountains Lament, where he talks about the mountains crying because their children are missing. And to Diné, the sacred mountains are the sign, they are our archives, they are our ways of thinking, and they are the refuge, the signs of our homeland. And so in his poem, he's really critically thinking and expressing, personifying the mountains, Zich, and showing how they're feeling about their children being taken away from them. And that's a very powerful poem, and also his story and how we connected with his family through this project and shared his work with them and his relatives and kin.
We only have a short time here left, but I want to ask you on a personal level how you learn about all of these really heavy topics. And as you mentioned, they affect your own family.
I think I want people to know what it is hard. The tears to me are a lot of healing, but it also is inspiring because we are descendants of survivors and we don't have to constantly be gripping on to life. It's that connection of family, home, lands, and water that bring us that hope and keeps us going. And the hope is healing. And so I know my father is very fortunate. It was a miracle that he survived when he was a child going through that snowstorm, and it happened that there was a rancher out there who was able to take him out of that and save his life. And I'm grateful for that. But I also want to bring light to these dark, often hidden stories so that all of us realize every child matters and every child can be, a mother, a father, an auntie, an uncle, a leader in the community. And it's all tied into these things. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Farina King, thank you so much for being here. The United States officially has a new treasurer. That, of course, is Lynn Malerba. And later Tuesday, Mary Peltola will be sworn in as a congresswoman representing the state of Alaska. ICT's political correspondent, Polly Danette-Claude, joins us now with the latest. Welcome, Polly.
Thank you so much for having me again, Aaliyah.
These are such historic times. I mean, let's just jump right in here. Tell us about the new swearing in of the next treasurer of the United States.
Yes. So yesterday, Chief Lynn Malerba was sworn in at the U.S. Treasury, at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And it was a very tearful and moving moment. And particularly for me, what I thought was so incredibly moving was just this moment between Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, and the new Treasurer, Chief Malerba. And she recognized her in the audience and said, "Hey, Deb, I see you're tearing up a little. Don't make me, cry as well." And I just thought that was such a beautiful moment between two Indigenous women leaders. And I just felt that it was incredibly moving. But yes, this is going to be a historic week in Indian country, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, let's just jump right into what's happening later Tuesday. That, of course, is when Mary Peltola will be sworn into office. What are you hearing about that, and what can we expect to hear in terms of, how fast she'll get to work?
Yes. So right now, Mary Peltola, she just posted a photo of her at her new office here in Washington, D.C. And so that was very exciting to see. And tonight at about 6:30 Eastern time, she is going to take her oath of office. She's going to be sworn in at the House chambers. And it's going to be a really exciting moment. And then after that, there is, I guess, after the initial swearing in, there's another sort of more private ceremony thing that happens in the Rayburn room, which is a little bit off of the House chambers. So that's what the swearing in ceremony is going to be today.
Do we know yet who will be in attendance? I mean, at Lynn Malerba's swearing in, of course, you mentioned Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids, but do we know who will be at Representative-elect Peltola's swearing in?
It is definitely going to be no surprise to see, and this is just speculation on my part, I would, hope to see Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland there. Of course, Representative Sharice Davids is going to be there because, she is also part of the House of Representatives. And, it would be interesting as well to see some of the other Alaskan representatives there. Senator Murkowski, Speaker Pelosi is also going to be there as well because she's the Speaker of the House. So it's going to be a really incredible group of folks.
Polly, what kinds of changes do you think these two women will bring to national policy and to politics in general?
So one of the things that I think is really important is that the message that former Congresswoman Deb Haaland, one of the messages that she had when she ran was that a voice like hers had never been heard in Congress before. And I feel like that same message applies to Representative-elect Mary Peltola. She is the first Alaskan Native woman to be in Congress. And so I feel like having her there, having somebody who has her lived experiences is going to be really important in, I believe it's the 117th Congress. And I think it's just going to be incredible to have her voice in the conversation because Alaska does have, different issues compared to us in the lower 48.
I want to talk very quickly about Representative-elect Peltola because she'll be on the ballot again in November. So explain to our viewers kind of what's going on there and, what we can expect to see in November.
Yes. So she was essentially running two campaigns at once. And so there was the special election to fill in the seat for Don Young, and that term ends in January. And so right now, she will be in the seat for Don Young until January, but then in November, we'll see who will then take Don Young's seat for the next 2 years. And so it's going to be really important to watch that race as we go to the general election. And again, it's going to be ranked choice voting, and we saw how Peltola did in the primary. And so it's going to be really exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Polly, you're busy, so we'll let you get back to work. But thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Telling stories is what Ramona Emerson usually does with her video camera. Well, she's put that camera down and instead has started writing. She has a new novel out called Shutter, and she's here to tell us more about her book. Hi, Ramona. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're very excited that you're here. Our viewers are learning about your book for the first time, so give us an overview of what it's about and what to expect.
Oh, well, Shutter basically tells the story of Rita Todachini, who works as a forensic photographer in Albuquerque, New Mexico for the Albuquerque Police Department. But it also fluctuates between her days as a forensic photographer as well as her childhood growing up on the Navajo reservation. And through that story, you learn that Rita has a very special gift that she hides in her present day, which is that she can speak and see ghosts. So she can communicate with people who have passed over. And as a Navajo person, that's a pretty taboo thing, a pretty taboo gift to have. And so the story, kind of centers around that and a victim of a homicide in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who kind of makes Rita's life really tough.
This is your first novel. Maybe tell us how long you've had it brewing in your head.
Well, when I was working as a filmmaker, it was very early, like late 90s when I got out of film school, and there wasn't really a film industry here in New Mexico. So I worked mostly as an independent filmmaker as well as working as a forensic photographer and videographer in Albuquerque. So I did that for 16 years. At that point, I was just making films, so I had no intention of becoming a novelist or even writing a book. That seems so far removed. But over the next, maybe 16 years or 10 years of just dealing with all of that stress working in forensics and, of course, making a bunch of films at the same time, I quit the job and joined a writing workshop, and which is where the story started. It started as a bunch of short stories about my own relationship with my grandmother and some, a smattering of spooky stories that I told. But I think it really, when I got into the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, I had originally wanted to have it be a screenplay, but my mentors and people encouraged me to make it into fiction. And I took the big leap. Instead of doing a screenplay or screenwriting MFA, I got my fiction MFA. And in the process of being there, doing my MFA, I wrote the novel. So my master's thesis was my 360-page first draft of my book. So it took me 10 years to write the book, though. I think mostly because I was working as a filmmaker at the same time. So I was trying to juggle both things. I was making a film called The Mayors of Shiprock at the same time, and it was really hard to do both. So it took a lot longer than a lot of books do.
I've never met a forensic photographer before. Maybe tell us what exactly that means.
Well, I will tell you this: it's never as exciting as it looks like on CSI or SVU or any of that stuff. It's a lot of working. I worked for a private firm, so I didn't work for APD. So for me, forensic photography was a lot of evidence. You take photographs of people's injuries. You take a lot of video of the way people live after they've had an injury. I spent a lot of time underneath vehicles, measuring scuff marks and impact areas, and looking at the way accidents happen, measuring skid marks. Photographing evidence, which sometimes is unfortunately people, and sometimes it is, a vehicle, or it's a home, or it's a construction site. It's the site of an explosion that may have happened. So it's whatever they need you to do when they need you to do it. You're always on call, and you got to go take photographs of whatever it is that they're trying to document and get evidence of. And it's an important job. It's a tough job, and as a Navajo person, as a Diné, it was a very tough job to have. And my grandma scolded me a lot for keeping that job for 16 years, but it was a good way to make money And also, my boss afforded me the chance to use the equipment at the forensic studio, so that helped me make documentaries. And I think that's probably why I stayed with the job for so long, because it gave me access, to equipment and to editing units, and it helped me make films for 16 years.
And it gave you a very interesting story. Very quickly, we only have a short time left here, but tell our viewers where they can find your book.
Oh, well, I always encourage readers to go to your local independent bookstore. I know that a lot of independent bookstores are, they have a stock of Shutter. But if that is something that you just can't do, you can pick up the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much every brick and mortar out there. It's out there. So just type Shutter in and Ramona Emerson, and it'll probably come up and you can find a copy.
Good. Well, Ramona, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.